Hello, good morning, everyone. We are very happy to have you here to be able to have our guest speaker today that is going to give us a very good talk and to greet you all on this Saturday morning in our talk series. We are having this talk series every Saturday at 11 a.m. So today, before we start, we would like to invite you all to join us in a prayer, and then we will introduce our guest speaker and we will start our talk. So we at this moment invite each and every one to join us in this prayer, elevating our thoughts, uniting our hearts to our Heavenly Creator, asking for guidance, for assistance, for protection. More in particular today to our guest speaker, that we may learn and grow from all the teachings he's going to bring to us. May we feel the presence of the good spirits around us, blessing us and helping us on this day. So be it. Okay, so we are going to be introducing to you our dear friend Marco Magalhaes. Hello, Marco, how are you doing?
Hello, hi, hello everyone. Good, thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Marco is talking to us from Canada, Toronto, and he's going to be talking to us about spiritual and physical pathogenesis of disease. So Marco Magalhaes, it has been studying Spiritism. He studied Spiritism for 10 years at the Mount Vernon Spiritist Center, and he participated in mediumistic meetings and other activities at the moment at the Toronto Spiritist Society and also Kardec Radio. He is assistant professor at the Faculty of Dentistry of the University of Toronto and staff oral pathologist at Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center. So thank you again, Marco, and now it's with you. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for allowing the opportunity for us to have this conversation today about spiritual and the physical pathogenesis, which is the mechanism where diseases emerge, right? So that's where we're going to be spending a few minutes talking about today. So when we're thinking about the way we experience diseases while incarnated in this planet, we tend to overlook the fact that we are not composed only of a physical body. And that's where Spiritist brings to us such an enormous amount of information, understanding that we're really composed of several layers or components. We as spirits have also this connecting system, we call it the perispiritual body, and then our physical body, which we use to interact with the world that we're incarnated on. So let's try to bring together these three different aspects in understanding how and why we go through this processes of disease, right, while we're incarnated here. So Paul, in the first letter to Corinthians, he writes this, which is quite interesting. He says, "Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit? So who is in you, whom you have received from God? Therefore, you honor God with your body," right? So that was an interesting way that Paul is giving us this heads up that, we receive this body. Like this is where we borrow it. It's right here. We need to use this. And this is an incredible gift to receive. So why don't we tell to God, which is giving us this opportunity, that we honor by actually protecting and using our body accordingly, right? So that was something quite important that Paul reminded us. So, and now we're talking about, obviously, our physical body, right? And if you look at our physical body, it is composed of several layers. It's a very complex organism. So if you look at only the physical perspective of it, we're derived from an evolution of different animals, right, on this planet. And we evolved through a very, very complex system of selection and evolution into this high order physical system that we live today as human sapiens. That's who we are. But as you look at this image here, the physical body is an incredibly complicated system that lives cohesively or together. And every single one of those organs and systems that we live on has this little cellular component or cells that have to work together. So all the cells work together and they make this system works, right? But let's learn a little bit more about it. So when we do have then a process of disease happen in our physical body, so this is the scientific view. So we're looking only at physical matter right now, okay? So what happens is each and every single one of the cells that are working together, like this environment, this complex environment of little individual bits of life that have to communicate. They have to work in sync. They have to work towards a common goal. It's like a little factory, right? Each one of those little individuals or the little cells are working under the influence of organs and tissues and systems, and they have to work nicely together. If they don't work together and one of those cells starts to be diseased or stops functioning, then we start to have a process of diseases, right? So, and what causes that what's the mechanism right behind this? So there are many, many mechanisms that we study in pathology, which is my specialty, which understands why a normal cell, as you can see here on one side, can progress into a diseased cell, as you can see the other side. So there are mutations, for example, that occur inside the cell, right, in our DNA. These mutations can be spontaneous, right, or random mutations. They can also be influenced by so many other things, like environmental factors, by sunlight, exposure to radiation, right, and certain pesticides and certain foods. There's many things that can influence this. We're also exposed to infections. So other microorganisms can take advantage of our own host, our own system, and infect our cells, causing them to be diseased or to be sick. And we are now living into one of those moments in life, on our experiences, that most of us now understand what exactly is an infectious process, because we're living through a pandemic caused by a virus, SARS-CoV-2, that can live into the epithelial cells of the linings of our nose and our throat, right? And when it reproduces, it causes those cells to be sick, and those cells die. And sometimes they can evolve into a very severe inflammatory condition that causes death. And that's why we're all being vaccinated now, to prevent that virus from getting access to our cells. Other factors, for example, can influence, as a part of a disease mechanism. For example, smoking, tobacco use, alcohol use, changes in nutrition, obesity. Also, now there are many reports that explain to us that changes in the metabolism of the body caused by the poor nutrition and obesity can lead to a very high risk of developing many chronic diseases that can cause also us to discarnate earlier. And many other chronic inflammatory conditions that can also cause our cells to die. So as you can see, this is a very scientific perspective, because we're only looking here at the physical aspect of things, right? So how our cells and our body can get sick and can evolve into a disease process. So let's think about now in a slightly different way, right? So because we have to bring the other layers, right, of who we are into the system, into this understanding, so we can we can know what exactly the disease is. So the next layer we call the spiritual body. As Allan Kardec puts into the Genesis, is the sensitive organ of the spirit, right? It is something that connects the physical aspect we just heard about in the physical body with we as spirits. So Allan Kardec, in the Spirit's book, question number 135, asks about the nature of the spiritual body, and the spirits are going to answer that. Human beings are composed of three things, and this is really the basis of our entire understanding of Spiritism. It relies heavily on understanding that we are this three layers, three different aspects, right, of our bodies, of human beings. So the first is material one, like the body, material aspects, which is similar to animals, and it's explained by evolution and a scientific perspective. And most of what we know about it comes directly from science. It is similar to that of the animals and animated by a vital principle, just like any living being on this planet is animated by the vital principle, which is derived from the creative thought of God, right? The second aspect of it is the immaterial being, so which is our soul or spirit, which incarnates into the body. And the third aspect of it is what links or unites we as a spirit, which is immaterial, to a very rough material entity, which is our physical body. Now, you can kind of imagine right now how complicated that is, right? Because if you think about a spirit, as we don't even have the terms to describe what a spirit is scientifically, right? Because pretty much everything you try to use to describe the spirit is not perfect, because we typically use material things to describe it, right? For example, if you say vaporous or ethereal, all of those terms are really derived from scientific terms of matter. So it really doesn't work well. And Allan Kardec nicely explained that in the Spirit's book. So it is this immaterial, not well-defined entity, which is we are as a spirit, and connecting directly to our physical body. So let's try to learn more now about this uniting link, which is the perispiritual body. So now we can understand how the spirit can influence matter, and how things that occur in the matter can imprint into the spirit. And now we're going to explain a lot more details about this. And again, this is really like a core element of what we learn and what you understand. And the very first sections of the Spirit's book are going to go through this. All right. So if you think about how do we make that connection, and this is a good representative slide here. You have a cell system, one unique cell on one side, composed by a nucleus, a cytoplasm, a membrane, multiple small organelles inside, and in the other side, just to represent, is the spirit, which I intentionally represented as like some sort of ethereal way, just to represent the fact that it is immaterial. And we need to have that link, that connection. So there you go. So what we're missing here is that connection is the perispiritual body. So what is it, right? So there are very good descriptions of the perispiritual body, both in the Spirit's book and also the Evolution to Worlds. What it is basically, this semi-material body that envelops the spirit. And this semi-material body derives from elements from the planet that we are incarnating. So in other words, depending on where we are incarnated, the perispiritual body can actually change quite significantly. You can imagine if you're in a highly evolved world, so the perispiritual body will derive elements from that world, and then it's going to be very, very even lighter or more ethereal than the perispiritual body of us here on Earth, which again, we're deriving from elements of a planet which is still in the process of going through a world of regeneration, right? So we're not that high in that level of evolution. This perispiritual body then connects to every single one of our cells. And that's quite amazing. That, again, André Luiz brings to us that element in the Evolution of Two Worlds. And every single one of our cells is under direct connection to the perispirit, and the perispirit in turn is directly connected to who we are as a spirit. So that's why we can actually transmit directly to each one of our cells our emotions, our feelings, our energies, our good deeds, our bad ones, right? So everything that transpires in your thoughts are directly connected and transmitted to each one of our cells. So what does that mean, Marco? So what that means is now we can start to understand a little bit better how our body changes under stress, for example, or when we're happy, or when we do things that are not that good, right? So every time we're doing those decisions and making those thoughts, right, those actions in our minds, our cells respond to it. And obviously now you can see that if we're doing something really, really nice and we're helping someone, we're sharing love, that good vibration will automatically transmit into our cells, and then they're going to cause physical changes. And those physical changes, we know them because we feel them, right? And science can detect them. So if you go and check your levels of certain hormones, for example, they're going to be higher up when you're happy, right? And that's fantastic. But who's doing that is actually we as a spirit through the action of our perispiritual body. Now, what is even more interesting than that is that because each one of those cells are directly connected to us through our perispirit, we can actually influence their behavior, but also influence their genetic expressions. We can influence their metabolism. We can influence how well they fight off an infection. Aha. So now we're going to go into a lot more details about this. Okay. So let's see. Now, in Evolution in Two Worlds, André Luiz in the chapter 17 says this. So disease then, the process of disease emerges when the patient, without humility, patience, spirit of service, and devotion of the good, and that's my highlight there, okay? When we're lacking all of those things, right, we can't assimilate this beneficent currents that come from the above and circulate around all things, right? Stimulating the maximum benefit of existence of Earth. And what is really André Luiz trying to tell us here? Well, let's go back one step. So here we are. We're made of three different elements, right? We are a spirit that has a link that connects to a body, and we're all directly connected to each other. But we're also now living in the universe that has other layers and other levels of existence. So God, who loves the creation, obviously all of us, and constantly sending this current of good vibration to all through these workers and touching every one of us. So that current, it's important to keep us balanced, to keep us connected, right? And if we're not open to receive that help, it makes even harder for us to function individually. So in a way, the same way that every single cell is connected to us through our perispirit, every single thing in the creation is also connected to God directly, right? So that's another layer that comes above us, right? And André Luiz gives us a good hint here, right? Because he's saying, well, if you're not patient, if you don't have the humility, right, and the spirit of service, so you're not serving, right, you're not enacting your love through charity, then it starts to get a lot more difficult, right, for us to fight off these negative things that still live with us. Okay, so that's the first step. And then in the chapter 20, Evolution Two Worlds, he continues and explains this quite interesting mechanism, right? So almost all of the disease process occur when this zones of unhealthy predisposition, so this unhealthy zones in our bodies form because of this imbalance of our mental forces. So when our mental or our thoughts as a spirit when depending on how we're projecting that in our body, we can create these areas of rupture of the perispirit to the physical body. Remember, I told you that every single one of our cells is connected, right? And we're bathing those cells in our thoughts and vibrations. So depending on how our vibration and our thoughts are dissonant or discordant with the love of God, we can actually negatively influence areas of our body. And that creates, as Andrea Luiz explained to us, a rupture, a separation of little areas of cells to our perispirit. So let me explain this to you in a very interesting way. Like imagine you're working on a particular factory where there are multiple, there's a sequence of events that has to occur for something to be built. And I'll give you an example that I can easily kind of understand too, which is like a car, right? So you're going through a line, and then the first step is that you have to build the frame, and then someone's going to come and connect the engine, and then another person down the line is going to put the wheels, and then the steering wheels, and then the doors, and then you close it up, and then you clean it, and then you're ready to go, right? Just like all these little steps, right? And every single one of those steps are connected because they have to occur in a sequence, right? So there are systems in place that allow people to work step by step, and things will happen without everything collapsing. Now imagine that one day there's this lack of communication, let's put it this way, between a particular step on that build line, and that step is not working well. So the car's coming now down, and then the frame's ready, and then the engine's ready. But all of a sudden, the step that you're supposed to put the wheels on, it's not done properly because it's not connected. It's discordant. It's disconnected to the entire system. And then the car moves down the line, but then the next person who's supposed to put the steering wheel and the driving commands and the brakes, they cannot do it because there are no wheels on the car. And then they don't know what to do because there's a problem now, right? And then the line has to stop because things are not working properly, right? So it's an almost identical system in our bodies. So if we, as a spirit, we're emanating certain vibrations to our own cells through our perispirit, and that particular emanation of that imbalanced mental forces will cause a rupture, a separation, or a lack of communication between parts of our body and our perispirit. Then that part of our body now is going to be more susceptible to a lot of things. For example, infections, or the development of tumors, or other diseases, because it's not working, right? So that is one of the key elements that we learned from Andrea Luiz and Spiritism in general through Kardec works first, right? And understanding how disease manifests. Okay, so now and similarly in Evolution Two Worlds, we're gonna Andrea Luiz is gonna mention to us that, for example, many infectious processes also occur the same way. And I'll explain to you. So when you see this image here on screen, you have some bacteria living on the wall of the colon. So the little squiggly pink things are actually living on top of epithelial cells, which are the big globular yellowish looking cells in the bottom there. And they actually live happily ever. So bacteria are living in our bodies, and they actually have more bacterial cells than our own cells in our bodies. And we live really well together. And that is amazing because people think that bacteria is bad in general. And I'll tell you quite the opposite, is that we would not be able to survive in this particular world, in this physical body, if we did not have the particular species of bacteria that lives with us, right? Because this bacteria, they do a lot of things to help us, but also they can prevent some really bad bacteria to come in and take over, right? So when there is an imbalance, remember now, imagine that There's this mental forces through our thoughts and actions are projecting these very negative vibrations to parts of our body. There's a rupture in a paraspiritual continuity, so it's not there's a lack of coordination in certain areas of the body. What happens is that there's an imbalance, and this imbalance may manifest, for example, with increased susceptibility to infections. So that's why some individuals may have had contact with particular bacteria multiple times and never developed the disease, and all of a sudden they fell ill with the same bacteria because now their body's not able to respond in the same way. There are many mental states, and a lot of people anecdotally knows this, right? So for example, when we are depressed and we're sad or we're stressed, the risk of falling ill for other things is a lot higher because, again, we are causing this temporary imbalance in our system. Okay. Now, so we talked about our susceptibility due to mental currents and how we influence our own body. Now, there's another layer of this. So sometimes this influence or this areas of instability or susceptibility in our body, they are not derived from now, but they're actually coming from our previous actions. And this is also something that Spiritism illuminates us incredibly, because otherwise we would not be able to understand most of the diseases that can occur, for example, in kids and young, right, up to early adulthood, right? Because in that age group, particular scientifically tested risk factors are really not applicable, right? So like think about habits and metabolic changes and smoking and all those things you can think about, exposure to the sun and radiation. Those are really good to explain increased risk later in life, but not for youngs, for example, right? So what is happening then? So what happens is that's remember that André Luiz mentioned to us, right? He said, that lack of humility, lack of service of good, and the imbalanced vibrations and thoughts and actions, right, that we're projecting in our body, they can create these areas of instability, and those areas actually get imprinted on our perispirit, because remember, they're all connected, right? So that creates almost like a memory area on the perispiritual body, and then we discarnate, and then our physical body is going to be recycled, right? Because nature is perfect, right? So our physical body is going to be taken down to the earth. Nice bacteria is going to just get rid of it and then incorporate it back into the living beings, right? So, for example, we might have little carbon atoms in our bodies right now that were the same atoms that lived through the dinosaurs. So we actually all related, right? Physically. So our bodies are gone now, and all we have now when we discarnate is we as a spirit and our perispirit. But as you can see here in the little cartoon that I prepared for you, if you look at the body in the middle over there, and I'll pull a little pointer here so we can all see this. Yep, so we can all see it now. So if you look at the representation in the middle, now we have spirit, and we have our perispirit, which really, there's no shape or form to it. We know that it is connected to us as a spirit. It is connected to the physical body. But, it has we can't really measure by physical terms, right? It is not visible in general terms, but we as a spirit can make it visible and touch things and move things. And, that's why sometimes people see spirits, right? So when we're seeing spirits, we're seeing the perispiritual body of that spirit, which becomes visible, right? Through changes in the density of that body. So here we are. Now, if you see the little gray clouds that I drawn here in the middle, those are the areas of instability that were generated, or areas of susceptibility that were generated because of actions we had in the past. Now, when we are incarnated again, what happens? So what happens is now those areas in the perispirit are going to be filter through our physical body again, and we may have now, since early age, some diseases or some processes that can lead to diseases down the road, right? That's why you see, for example, individuals who are very young age developing some very devastating cancers, for example. And that typically happens when, again, our those areas that we've generated in the past through our actions can now imprint themselves back into the body. And that's how we cleanse it, right? So the body is such a great gift, the physical body, because that's how we're cleansing, getting rid, right, of that deleterious energy that we created by actually living through the consequences of it. Oh my goodness, think about this. Marco is saying that whatever I've done in the past, I'll have the consequence of my own actions. Yes, that's right. My dear friends, this is so important to remember, right? Because even if you don't get anything about all the cells and connections and things that I'm talking about here, but if you go back to what I just said and remember that, I think it's worth it, right? To remember that our actions have reactions, and we ourselves are going to live through exactly that, right? And now I'm just giving one example here that our bodies are actually allowing us to do just that. So our bodies are going to be filtering through that negativity that we've generated, and it typically manifests as a change or disease or abnormalities in our physical body. Okay? So, for example, there are many mutations that can occur very early on in congenital. So they're in the early development of the body. Usually those mutations, they are agreed upon even before we incarnate, right? So we agree that our new bodies are going to have a particular type of mutation or abnormality that is important for me to rescue the debts that I've already created before, right? And we also have mutations that are acquired. What that means is that they're influenced by my actions now. So there's two different types. So all of those things will lead us to have an increased risk, right, of developing diseases. Okay? But God is perfect, right? And sometimes we forget this. So it's always good to remember, right? So nothing really happens by chance, and we're not deemed to suffer for everything. That's not the goal. Of course, sometimes we have to go some challenges and trials, but we don't have to do this all the time. So we have something called the modifiers or disease modifiers, right? We study them in science, and we also study them in Spiritism, which is also a type of science, right? That studies the relationship between the spiritual world and us, right? So these disease modifiers are really critical, but they're quite different if you look at the scientific literature or if you're looking at the Spiritist literature, because one is talking about moral aspects and the other one is talking about specific physical aspects, right? I'll give you an example, right? Let's say an individual has a particular metabolic disease, let's say has diabetes, right? Diabetes can be a very difficult disease in general, very challenging. It forces a number of life changes that are needed or they're required for an individual to survive. So those life changes can be quite challenging, but at the same time, many individuals have success in controlling the disease by implementing healthy changes. So those are the disease modifiers. You can have specific changes in the way you eat, how you live, right? Decreasing, for example, other risk factors, and you're going to have a relatively normal life with the same disease. Or you can have something worse and making things worse by making it not implementing the right changes to your life, or start smoking and not doing exercises and things like this, which again will modify that disease in more in a negative way, right? So those are the disease modifiers. But now in Spiritism, the disease modifiers are quite different, and we're going to talk about them now, right? And just one example for you guys to see. I always like to kind of show a little bit of our pathology images here, but just to show you how in a disease process, you have this lack of homogeneous cohesiveness in cells. The cells look different. So on where the pointer is right now, you have a normal bone, and that's the bone marrow here in the bottom. And then you have these little cells in the middle of a bone. We call those osteocytes. And on the right side here, you have a cancer of the bone called osteosarcoma. And now you can see that the cells are quite different from one another. They're obviously not homogeneous. They look quite different from each other, and that's and they lack the coordination, right, to grow together. So that's an osteosarcoma. Okay. So in Evolution to Worlds, we're going to get some of the examples, right, of how pathological processes affect the perispirit in the physical body. For example, one of the examples that we have when it's cited is that, for example, if you have a suicidal wound, right, to the heart, you may develop in your next incarnation bleeding problems, right, loss of prothrombin, which is a one of the steps in the cascade of coagulation, right? So you're bleeding too much. And in those reborn for treatment to recover the spiritual body in dystonia, which is an ability to move the body. So you see, this is one example of how if you inflict a wound in your body in one incarnation, you can come back another time with that imprinted area on your heart affected that can cause you to have a number of bleeding disorders, for example. Self-poisoning, right? So you can develop hematopathology, so diseases of the blood system, disharmony of the bone marrow. For example, your bone marrow produces your red blood cells, for example, causing anemia, which is like the low red blood cells, or high reticulocyte cell count. So this is like immature red blood cells. So your bone marrow is not functioning properly. This is one of the examples cited for us by Luis. Okay. There's more. For example, if you voluntary disrupting of the skull or fall from height, right? Addiction. So what do it cause? So if your brain is affected, for example, by a voluntary wound like to your body, you can develop later on. You can have arrhythmia. You can have in newborn patients. You can have tetany, or in lactating babies, hydrocephaly. Epilepsy, cerebral palsy, all those things can be a direct consequence from the wound that was generated in your body, then the spiritual body, and now coming back to your body again in a slightly different way, right? Now, this is just a few examples because really there's no rule, right? So you things can develop and evolve in many different ways, and depends on how much you've done to repair how much you've changed. How, there's many other factors that influence how this is going to manifest down the road. It's not that you've done this and the same thing's going to happen to you again. That's exactly the opposite of what happens, right? There's a lot of factors that are involved in this, okay? And also he cites the example of individuals who commit homicide, suicide. They can, for example, come back in the new life with and having to go through violent deaths as a kid, or accidental deaths as a kid. And this is something that happens often, and typically we tend not to understand that well. It is challenging. I can't even explain or understand how challenging that is. But at the same time, Spiritists bring us this light of understanding that if that happened, there was a reason for it, right? And if that happened, it was part of the perfection of the divine plans, and we have to go through it, right? All of us involved, and we know it's gonna be for the better, right? Down the road. Okay, so that's the consoling part of the Spiritism. Okay, so what are the disease modifiers? So here's what we're gonna do. So if we're there with our unhappy face, right? So that unhappy face represents everything that goes against the divine laws, right? You know, the what Jesus explained to you so many times. And now the happy face is then we're able to neutralize those, right? And we neutralize those. We know it, right? Remember what Jesus told us, like the very, very first time, like very early on? He said something very simple, right? So what are the two rules? So, you know, Kardec also mentions that in Spirit's book, but the basic rules are, you know, which is basically compounded in every single one of the laws, is like love God and love one another, and, you know, do unto others what you expect people to do unto you, right? So that's the basic principle. Okay, but how do we do that, right? So we have to really look into ourselves and understand what are we doing and how can we do things better, right? So knowing thyself, right? And we know that too, right? And also living by what Jesus explained to us. Easy peasy, right? Or maybe we still have to work a little bit on it, but we know what to do. So these are the disease modifiers looking at a spiritual Christian perspective compared to the disease modifiers in a biological perspective, right? So what we do then, we, you know, obviously we, to do this favorable behavior, to improve ourselves and physically and spiritually, you know, we have to live, you know, the righteous life. We have to love your neighbor, love yourself, and put charity into practice. Start helping others, right? Be out there, reach out. And, you know, there are so many things we can do. Chico gave us a great example, right? Do you remember when Chico had his dog, which was one of his dogs that was sick, and his neighbor, you know, obviously looking at that situation that there was a very sick dog, and Chico was obviously working really, really hard on his day job and also in Spiritism. She decided to put the dog down, and she thought on her mind of, obviously in her ability to understand the situation at the time, um, um, she decided to put the dog down, and Chico was obviously very touched by it, right? And he was not happy with it. So, you know, Emmanuel comes over and said, you know, you got to find a way to get rid of this animosity, right? This is not helping you or her. So go there and figure out what's the best thing, what's exactly what she wants, and give it to her, right? And he was obviously like, really, right? Is that what we want to do? And he did. So he works very hard. He gets the money to buy a sewing machine, and he buys to her. And that reconnects them, or get rid of all that negativity that was generated by that situation. And that alone may have changed the lives of those two individuals, right? And you know, it's important for us. So little things like saying hi to someone, or being helpful, right? Or not being too hard on yourself, right? And understanding that we all have flaws, and we can all of us have a chance to do better, to improve, right? To recognize our mistakes, right? And going by those basic rules of of loving one another and helping each other. But does that mean that I'm not going to go through any disease process if I do that? Not at all, right? There's a lot of things that we still have to go through, but they may be attenuated by our own actions, right? So the more change you implement, positive change you implement in your life, the less you're going to be able to go through as far as trial goes, because you've already earned it, right? So we have to earn our little steps in evolution, right? And there's an interesting point here about Tim on the chat. He mentioned that this may be seen a way to blame to themselves or others for disability or disease. That's actually quite the opposite. There's actually not blaming, right? The idea is that a disease process is really a very complex process that involves previous actions, current actions, how much effort we've put through to make the necessary changes, and how much more could we do and we're still not doing. So there's a lot of perspectives, right, that are in place at one time that will manifest as a disease process, right? And we don't have to go through it, right? Quite contrary, we're all going to get to the point of evolution that we're going to able to live by the laws of God to a point that we don't have to be this repay mode of like, I got to do this again because I haven't done that. That's not going to happen at some point. It's just that we're still into the stage that we know about the laws, right? But they're not inside of us yet. Maybe some of them, right? Maybe from some of us now, it's quite obvious that we can't harm another person, right? But for other people, that may not be that obvious. So we're at different stages of that evolution, right? And there's the idea now is there that we really own everything we do, right? So if we are one day, we're doing certain actions, right? We do something that's say very, very negative to someone or to ourselves, right? And knowing that every single one of those things will have consequences down the road. It may not be a disease. Like this is one of the examples, right? So we're looking at physical diseases manifesting as consequences of our actions. But, something will happen at some time that will challenge us to the consequence of our own actions, right? And that is really the perfection of the creation, the justice, right? The law of justice resides there. Because it's not someone's fault, right? It really never is, right? In any situation is really our own learning perspective, right? And that's how we should take it, right? Instead of assigning blames. So what is the antidote, right? What is the medication then, right? So to support for others, create protection for ourselves. Isn't that amazing? Right? So now it's like a vaccine. That's what we're talking about, right? So how do we vaccinate ourselves, against all those things that we're talking about, right? So supporting others, right? So that's why the principles of Jesus of uprooting us from this pride and vanity and greed, cruelty, avarice, exhorting us to simplicity, to humility, fraternity without limits. Unconditional forgiveness is not forgiving here or there, right? It's like, people like to say, I forgive this guy, but I still hate them, right? So it's like, that's really not forgiving, right? It's like, that doesn't work, okay? So unconditional forgiveness, I'm not saying that we have to like be super friends and kind of invite all people that do bad things into our house and make a party. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that do not carry that negative feeling towards them. That is really what we're talking about, right? So if you don't implement simplicity, humility, fraternity without limits, unconditional forgiveness, which is basically the opposite of the pride, greed, vanity, cruelty, avarice. That's the only way we establish what we call, and Chico here, André Luis Chico says, the perfect immunology of our inner life. That's how we boost our immunity. It's like a vaccine, right? Strengthening the power of the mind and self-defense against the destructive and degrading elements that surround us. So, how do we summarize this? Do good. Do you really want to and be healthy spiritually and physically? Do that by being good to others and to yourself, right? Oh, Marco, but I know a lot of people that have been fantastic their whole lives and they died of a devastating disease. Oh, yes, they did. I know that. That happens all the time. And it's not because, so doing good doesn't help. That's not the point. The point is that by doing that good, they probably alleviated a lot of what they had to go through to start with. And they may have carried many other things from the past that they had to go through. And that's part of the process. But now, after being good and going through what they've done before, I can guarantee you that they're going to come back in a very, very different position, right? They're going to come back with their immunity very high, towards anything negative, right? So we can't be too narrow-sighted, right, when we're looking at this perspectives of how things can change over incarnations. We have to understand that things take sometimes multiple incarnations to heal, right? And how does science, takes this? So just I have just a couple papers here that I want to mention, but just to prove the point that this is what's happening, right? So there's a nice paper, Brown, published in 2013 in his team. He's looked at over 800 individuals that lived at assisted living communities, right? Elderly individuals. And they looked at the general trends in mortality over a long period of time. And what they've realized that the individuals who were helping others lived longer than the ones that were not helping others, right? There you go. So that's how charity can influence the way we as a spirit project vibrations and energy, good positive energies to our paraspirits, who also make our cells work better, and then, yes, make us as a system work better. So there's actually scientific evidence of that. That's exactly what Spiritism is telling us, right? And, there are many other papers. I'm not going to have a lot of time, but you can read, just like this Stobbe Volhart paper, 2018, shows that, how altruism can be born out of suffering, and how caring, helping after victimization can help. So, for example, if something, so this, you see this in hospitals and many other places, if something really, really negative happens, and you take that opportunity to make a positive changes towards another person that may have been through a lot of hardship, that actually helps we, or the individual who suffered in the first place, to improve our psychological scores and life, our overall happiness and survival and all those things. So it's very important, right? So helping others actually help us too. Right? That's fantastic. Okay. So there's also a nice, interesting review paper by Lucati and Marleni that looked at the how Spiritist therapy can also help. And that will be a very interesting reading for us. We can have another session just on those things. But so they summarize basically here. It's like several papers that looked at how prayer and coping, and private prayer can help outcomes, right? And I'll just go through just a few of them here. For example, I et al. Look at 177 patients undergoing cardiac bypass graft surgery, and they looked at the outcome as post-operative complications. So prayer frequency, so the more pray, right, were associated with reduced complications, but not hospitalization, right? So these are small studies, right? Obviously, we need a lot more controls and better control studies to get definitive answers, but these are really like very good hints, right? That's how important, right? Being helpful to others and praying and connecting to God and changing our vibrations and our minds and our thoughts can help. It may not get rid of what you have to go through, but always help. Is that we expect that we're going to pray and things will go away, right? And that is not the law of justice, right? The law of justice is really, we have to live through the consequence of our own actions, right? But being praying and helping others can alleviate the burden of what we get through, right? And there are many other papers. So, for example, there are prayer coping and private prayers, and all of them showed some improvements in depressive symptoms, increased optimism, quality of life, and so forth and so on, right? So it is quite important, okay? Now, and then just to finalize here, it's important for us to remember this. So disease is actually part of the cure, right? And I know this this can be quite a challenging concept to a number of individuals. But the fact that we're going through a disease process, it means that we're already going through consequences of actions. And that process itself is actually what brings us real cure. The real cure occurs when we as a spirit now can understand what we've done, we've learned from it, and we moved forward. We can only finish that cycle if we sometimes have to go through the process of a disease process again, right? So for example, when you see an individual, and I see this in my practice all the time, with a chronic disease affecting the body, right? An autoimmune disease or cancer, and we're looking at the individual going through that. Yes, it is difficult. They're suffering. It's challenging. We know that, and it's not easy. And I completely understand that. But at the same time, if you look at the spiritual perspective, that is individual that is winning, that is moving, that is accomplishing, like the tail end of that story that started probably many, many incarnations ago, where by previous actions, we now generated that energy that caused the disease, and now we're cleansing it through the process where your body's showing it, right? So the body's showing the disease process, okay? So in a spiritual perspective, we'll see that individual, after they go through and they come back another incarnation, they got rid of it, right? They beat it, right? It's done. And it doesn't matter if they're alive or they end up discarnating because of the disease. That outcome, that's what we use in science, right? Survival rates. That may not mean the individual has cured itself or not in a spiritual perspective, right? Because some individuals can go through a disease process to try to repair what they've done before, but in that process, they can make other mistakes that they have to go through down the road, right? And that's not good, right? Because, in a way, the real cure has not been achieved. And we have many other individuals who are going through a disease process, but they're taking it as a learning opportunity. They're helping others. They're being altruistic. They're changing how they think about life, and everything is changing in a positive way. And all of a sudden, real cure is achieved, right? Yeah. So, so interesting question here by Luis. Luis, so we're talking about physical diseases, like physical body, right? So we're talking about either psychological or physical, right? Manifesting as, like chronic inflammatory diseases or cancer or, infectious diseases, right? So that's what we're talking about. And that disease, as I mentioned here, is something that we're looking at the physical body, like medicine treats, right? And the relationship is that disease that's treated by your medical doctors has roots into who you are as a spirit, and that's the direct connection between that and you as a spirit, right? And that's the relationship, right? That's the context, right? I hope that's clear. Okay. So again, the disease is actually the cure happening in front of us. Okay. And I know this is a challenging concept, but after you grasp that concept, you really change the way you see things, right? And I think that's important for all of us, because Spiritism brought to us that concept in a very, very clear way. Okay. All right. So these are some reference that I've used today, mostly from Evolution 2 Worlds, Mechanism Mediumship, Spirit's book, and the letter of Paul to Corinthians. Okay. So thank you all. We're going to have a few minutes for questions now.
Thank you, Marco. That was so enlightening. And I think, of course, a subject that touches us all. Every now and then we all have to deal with imbalances in our physical body, and we question and we want to understand why all that. And there are so many intrinsic things that we should be analyzing at this point. So we have some questions. Everyone is very happy with your presentation. Yasko presents this question. Hi, Marco. Good info. As in the example of the sequence in assembling line to deliver a product, the disease would result from disobedience of the law of sequence of order. right? What would be at individual and collective level the main step or level that we had misstep that is contributing to the severity of COVID pandemic? What had we learned from it?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. We can probably talk about an hour about it. So here's what happened. So the bottom line is that we don't have to go through a pandemic, right? This is not God's plans for us. And I think a lot of people kind of, somehow let their thoughts run into that line. So yes, Yasko mentioned here, yes, there's something that happened, right? There's something that occurred over a long period of time that led us, right, to what we're living right now. And this is now not at a single body connection. This is more like a systemic connection, like all of us spirits together, right? And I think that's exactly what Yasko's mentioned here. So what happens is, there are moments that the spirituality uses particular scenarios that we're living through this planet, and that scenario is used to teach, right, to help individuals and to allow certain things to happen. For example, we had, if you go to book in Planetary Transition, for example, Divaldo tells us in a very well, interesting way, like what happened during the tsunami, for example. That was a disaster, right? So, that's a natural disaster. But in that scenario, you had many rescues of individuals that were going through processes. They were being rescued at the same time. Some of them discarnated because that was part of their plan, and they had to do it. Others were living through very challenging times and were rescued at that time. And then there's the entire global changes that occur because every single person, individual in the planet was touched by it and pulled from inside their hearts the idea of help, of charity, right? So it was able to enable this global charity move, and everyone on the planet started thinking in a different way. So it started being angry about, like our first world kind of, problems, right? My dishwasher is not running properly, right? They started to realize that, wait a minute, there's like 200 people dying, and I gotta do something, right? See how that was kind of used to boost that up, right? Now, when you're looking at COVID, this is like the most incredible trial ever engineered that I've ever seen in my life, because now the single thing you can do to help is exactly what is the basic principle of the law of God, which is like, you gotta love one another. You gotta do to the other what you expect people to do to you. So do you want to protect others? You gotta do something, right? You yourself have to put a mask and social distance. You have to vaccinate, because you may not be, maybe you're not at high risk, right? Maybe you don't have any comorbidities. Maybe you live in an isolated island somewhere. I don't know. Maybe you don't have to do it for yourself, but you have to do it for others, right? You have to do for the others who can't isolate, who can't vaccinate, and so forth and so on. So in a way, it is a immediate, universal test of how can we act to the good of others, like immediately, right? So those things, obviously, obviously a lot of people are discarnating, and we know that could be consequences of things in the past or still things that we've done here. We don't know, and we can't really judge, right? That's not our goal, right? But it's important for us to look at what's happening right now and really understand, well, the assembly line here, obviously we've done things in the past that allowed us to get here, for sure, right? But right now our actions are dictating, right? Remember, the world is moving to regeneration, right? So at some point, some people can't really fit in, right, in our planet anymore, right? It's going to happen, right? And it's a way for us to really work really hard to help one another to move together. Because if we don't work together, things will collapse. So if you get like in a city, you can look at a city, a neighborhood, or a country, right? Or a continent, right? Where if one group does not follow guidelines, the entire community will suffer consequences, right? And this is really like the ultimate, most incredible way to put people to do the right thing because they can actually see the consequences happening in real time, right? We keep saying that, oh no, I'll come back, I'll fix it in another incarnation, right? It's like, spiritists do that a lot of the time, right? I'm doing this, I'm okay, I've learned how to help a little bit, but you can't help more because of this. Anyway, so we find excuses all the time, right? Not to do the right thing, right? And now we're actually living in a scenario that, if we actually don't do the right thing, we can actually see someone we love very much beside us discarnate. And it's as a direct consequence of our actions, right? This is really tough, right? And I think it taught us as humanity a lot about individuals who are having a hard time doing it and individuals who really excelled in doing it, right? And I think that's important. So in a way, it is part of the process of evolution, I think.
That's fantastic, Marco, because the way you presented it is exactly that. We don't do that because of ourselves. We do that because of others, and thinking about others, thinking about the common good. And this is the way, in terms of spiritual involvement, when we think about it, this is what we have to achieve, right? The love one another, like you said, it's the main thing, and we are having this opportunity now, and I think people should have this in mind. I mean, if you don't care about yourself, please at least care for others and think about others in a way that is right there for you to contribute. And also when you said something about, oh, okay, I can procrastinate, I can do that in another incarnation. The thing is, we don't know when, we don't know how, and where, right? Because at this point, if you lose the train here, who knows where you are going to get the next train, right? And
exactly.
So it's so important. Let's see, we have more questions from Luis Leon. Could you share with us a counterexample, a disease that does not have a spiritual pathogenesis?
Yeah. So, it's a great question, and I think I know exactly what you're trying to get here, and I'll give you one example, and I'll show you that even in that example there is a connection, right? So it's kind of a little bit of the reverse loop, but there's always going to be a connection. For example, so we know, right, that if you expose yourself to the sun, you have a very high risk of developing melanoma and squamous cell carcinoma of the skin, right? So that is well known. That's exactly how we develop. And you can say that, well, so I'm going out of the sun every day, I don't protect myself, I had warning signs everywhere that things were not doing well, and then all of a sudden, yes, you develop a cancer right in your forehead, right? And then you can say, well, that's physical, right? So there's the sun ray hits the skin, changes the DNA of that cell, that cell goes kazoo, and then a cancer develops. But even that, even in that scenario, I'll give you now the other story. Okay, the other story is that you're a spirit that has been through a lot of challenges accepting rules, right? And you've lived through about 10 incarnations in different scenarios where you're exposed to well-known rules that people tell you, like, this is not a good thing to do, and you go there and disobey them, right? And now you're coming to another incarnation, and then the new rule that you need to disobey is this one, that it's out there, and your doctor, your friends, your family, the poster, the TV is going to say, the incidence of skin cancer is going up, and you have fair skin, and you're high risk, and you got to protect yourself. There are tools for that, right? So again, you go and disobey another rule. By doing that, you already generated the imbalance that connects your perispirit, and actually your actions are now contributing to your high risk. So in a way, even in that scenario, the fact that you're insistently going against an obvious norm is actually increasing your risks on a cellular and spiritual perspective of developing the DNA imbalances. Because, for example, if you're really aware of it and you apply protection and all those things and you go outside, right? So you still have a risk, right? But there's mitigation factors, right? So if you're spiritually, you're still doing everything on the right way. So you're mitigating those risks, because even if the sun ray hits the cell and you're doing everything you can to help, that cell may be protected because your DNA can repair itself. and maybe you get the sun and you don't get cancer, right? But all of a sudden, because you disobey. So thalassemia, okay, great idea. So thalassemia, this is now like genetically encoded diseases, right? And these are conditions that you're born with, right? So this is quite different, right? And this particular if you're looking at this life alone, you can't really explain it, right? So that happens. I was born with it, right? But there are certain things that certainly happen so nothing happened by mistake, right? So if there is a genetically encoded disease that someone's born with, right, that they have to go through in life, it's 100% guaranteed that there's something happened in the past that led to the development of the imbalances in your perispiritual body that will have to be cleansed or dissimulated by some way. That can be through a genetically encoded disease. There's many of them, right? That actually you're born with, right? And now I think in general, obviously, I don't want to kind of grade diseases and say that, hey, that's okay, diseases are great, go for it. No, that's not the point, right? What I'm trying to say is that for every one of us, it doesn't matter how difficult it is what we're going through, we have to always understand that there's always something that I can do positive, even in the worst case scenario, right? And if we don't take that opportunity and learn from it, that's going to be even harder for me to go through it. And not only Spiritism is telling us that, science tells us the same way, right? If you're going through hardships that are not measurable, like, for example, there's a study that looked at individuals who lost kids to cancer between the age of 4 and 9. So all the parents that actually decided to help other parents, they were so much better in every single measurable way, right? They're better because they're making others better, right? So it doesn't matter what disease process we're talking about. Jesus gave us the antidote, right? It's not the point of saying, okay, what have I done to go through this? Like, that doesn't work, right? It doesn't matter what happened. What matters now, how can we make this better? And that's what Jesus is asking us every day, right? How can we learn from this? How can we help others with this? And how can I make the best out of my life with this, right? And I think that is the cure. That is the real cure that Jesus, which is the greatest doctor ever in the universe, ever that we ever heard about, is telling us, right?
Okay, thank you so much, Marco. I have another question. What would be the best way to recover ourselves in the present incarnation? Can we reprogram them and eliminate illnesses that are already installed?
Yes, that is a great question. Yes, we can do this every single day. Like, we can wake up and do exactly that, right? And I'll give you. There's numerous examples of this, right? But I think one of the greatest examples of this is diabetes type 2. So in type 2 diabetes, it is a metabolic disease that occurs in many individuals. It develops later in life. It's typically because our ability to regulate, to assimilate the sugars peripherally in the body, it changes. So we can't really work really well on putting the sugar inside the cell, and the cell can't really uptake it nicely. So there are many mechanisms why that happens, right? But you can actually control this disease completely just by changing your lifestyle, right? So doing exercises, eating better, right? Losing weight, only doing relatively easy things. Many or most will actually either get free of medication sometimes, or decrease the medications you can use, and have a normal life. That is possible. It's doable, right? In pretty much so our bodies, obviously, they're in a direct connection to us, as I mentioned before. Now, sometimes we can do our best and still have a disease, right? And that doesn't mean that it's not true because that happened. It just means that we had to go through it, right? And that's exactly what the divine providence organized for us. And that's a different story. But in many cases, if we're able to work hard and live in the good life, which is basically morally, spiritually, and physically, right? If we work towards positive thoughts and actions, that directly correlates to ourselves and make them do better too, right? There's so many examples of that. Like heavy alcohol consumption, for example. If we get rid of that, we automatically improve our liver cells. Straightforward, No, like, if we, and that, as the studies have shown us here, like if we engage in activities that are helping others, we automatically change our health, mental status, and we actually change the way our body works. So there are many hormones of stress that go down. There's a less incidence of other secondary diseases in individuals who help others, right? So it is there. Basically, you can do it every day, right? And it's not like, oh my goodness, I have to save 1 million people, right, to get better. No. Why don't you say hi to someone when you see them the first time, right? And say hello to the person who, thank you for the person who, but not say thank you, right? Project the thank you so they can feel it, right? So they can have a really good day too, right? How can we, now we're not really hugging anyone now, but like send the spiritual hugs to someone, right? So just like be nice, right? Be the person who, who sees someone, falling down or going through hardships, you go down and reach to them, right? Be that person, because by doing that consistently, you will slowly achieve the real cure. It may not be now though. Like don't be one of those that like, I want to do it now and tomorrow I'm going to be perfect. That's another type of disease, right? Now we're going to talk about that. But it's just like, just understand that the good you do, it doesn't matter how much or how little, or the consistency is the key, right? And we'll get you there. So you can do this every day. That's a great question.
Thank you. And we have a last question now. Andrea Lewis went back to the spiritual world with the diseases of the physical body manifesting in the birth spirit. Chico Xavier said that his physical body was sick, but he was not. What's the difference?
Right. So that's a great question too. So remember that I mentioned that the disease is the cure, right? So there are many individuals. There's tons of examples in the literature, right? I can cite a few, but in general, like imagine an individual that committed a very atrocious act, and during the process, he was discarnated, and he went there, and then he went and learning about what he's done. He came to terms. He said, that was not good. And then the final way of kind of fixing what the plan of what they had to do, let's say, was like they had to lose the entire arm. Like, you're going to be born without an arm, because kind of that's the way they've organized to address the issue that they committed before. I could just think about it, like a very hypothetical, right? But they worked so well. They worked really, really hard. So instead of kind of losing the arm, they just kind of severed the little pinky off, right? Or something like that. So they attenuated their actions. And then all of a sudden, because the enormous amount of good they've generated, they were able to completely rid or cleanse themselves of the energy they carried over that they had to deal with, right? So in a way, now they had a little pinky off, but they're cured. They don't have disease anymore, right? That's it. That was the cure. It happened. And the cure happened here, not the finger, right? That's just like a irrelevant thing right now, right? But there are processes in which you have individuals who achieve the cure, right? Even before anything happened, right? And when they finally get there, they realize that the cure has happened, right? And obviously, Andrea Louise, and I just want to make clear this to you, the scenario where you cited Andrea Louise happened after Andrea Louise came to realize that who he was as a learner, instead of as the guy that was cleaning the floor, instead of the guy that was there because he was really, really good, right, at doing what he was doing. See the difference, right? So the cure, it kind of has that step that you have to take that in consideration. Otherwise, it kind of falls off of order a little bit, right? So yes, he's cured, right? But after he comes to, and then he has to go back and see his family in a new house. Remember the story. So he has to go through those little steps until he realizes that he is a learner, and he has a lot to offer. He has a lot to help, and he's gonna now help the little ones by being humble and loving, right? And that's when that scenario comes in, right? The scenario comes in is like, yes, you're clear now, right? And kind of that's where you go.
Thank you so much, Marco. That was so good for all of us. Everyone is really happy. That
Yeah.
it's always good when we have, the different subject, and we show how rich the spiritist or spiritism actually is when we are talking about the three different aspects. And you brought something very interesting for us today. Like we said, so current for the situation that we are all living in the world. And as we
Yeah.
learned, it depends on us as well to make this improvement. So for us to end our presentation today, before that, we would like to invite you for the talk that we are going to have next week. It's going to be by Rejani Planner. She's going to be talking about the mysteries of the universe. And we would like to end this presentation to invite Marco to say to us our final prayer. Thank you.
Thank you. So let us all at this moment elevate our thoughts and our minds to our Father, Mother, God, our Creator, to all our spiritual friends, mentors, every single one of us that are going through challenges and difficulties right now in this incarnation, all the suffering spirits that are still inhabiting this planet and the universe. May we all feel connected together as the universal family, the family that is connected now to our God directly, and we can feel it. Let us feel the energy coming from God and reaching any one of us, connecting to our bodies, to our minds. And may we ask that we can direct these good vibrations and thoughts to every one of those who are suffering, the ones in the hospitals, the ones that are going through mental challenges, physical challenges. And we ask our dear God that you allows us to every day learn a little bit more about ourselves and move one little step at a time towards the goal of spiritual evolution. May we turn the concept of loving one another into action by just putting in practice the charity and the law of charity. Thank you, God, for one more opportunity we had to discuss and to learn. And may we be blessed with more opportunities like this in the days to come. So be it.